From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power alongside Joe Matthew. I'm Kaylee Lyons.
It's night 3, headlined by the formal acceptance speech of the vice presidential nominee, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
He introduces himself to the nation on a night packed with other high-profile speakers, including former President Bill Clinton, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi.
The proceedings are set to kick off just over 1 hour from now, and we'll look ahead with former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle from the swing state of Pennsylvania, and of course our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, with us for the hour. Kaylee, as we get ready for the next stage in this convention, coming off the Obama's speeches last night, and some pretty big stuff. We're actually now getting to the nominees themselves.
Yeah, and it's going to be a tough act to follow for the governor and now vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, who many Americans may not be fully familiar with yet. And this is perhaps his biggest opportunity to speak to the widest audience he will get to before the election in November.
Yeah, well, he'll have a pretty easy crowd, I suspect. I mean, that's not a bad opening act to have Michelle and Barack Obama. The delegates who we've talked to, the Democrats who've made their way here to Chicago, are amped up. It's a rally feel around the United Center, and I suspect that's just going to grow even more tonight.
Yeah, so let's check on the energy as things get underway here in Chicago with a live look from the convention floor. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is there now. Tyler, what are the vibes like?
Yeah, hey Kaylee, I'm here on the floor for the third night of the Democratic National Convention. We're going to show you around here so you can see the energy in the room. People starting to stream in, delegates, media. It is far the busiest night that we have seen so far. But directly behind me is actually Minnesota. We have planted ourselves in the Minnesota delegation because, as you mentioned, tonight the headliner speech will be Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He will be introducing himself to voters as well as formally accepting his party's Democratic nomination for vice president. Now, voters might know him as Minnesota's true-term governor, but before that, he served in the House of Representatives for 6 terms. In 2006, he actually flipped a Republican-held seat. So as voters start to get to know him, the campaign has been putting out people to talk about that, give us some of that preview. That includes Agriculture Secretary Tim Vilsack. He joined Bloomberg Television earlier today in his personal capacity and previewed what we could expect.
Governor Walz is someone that you can put into any room in any community in any part of the country, and he would be able to relate to the people in that room, which means that he can be a very powerful spokesperson for rural America, for the small towns and rural places in the country that oftentimes don't get the level of attention that they deserve. He understands that. I think that's why he's been successful.
Now, you heard him there reference rural America. Of course, Tim Walz's pick has been a nod to trying to get Democrats energized in some of these more industrial Midwest battleground states such as Michigan and Wisconsin. So we'll see how he appeals to those voters tonight. Also on the stage, Joe and Kaylee, we are expecting to hear from former President Bill Clinton as well as former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and also 2 names that could have been on there tonight as the headline speaker, potential VP names that were floated during the process, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, as well as Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro.
All right, Tyler, thank you. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall in the Minnesota appropriately delegation on the floor. We thank you. We'll check back with Tyler a little bit later on. This coming after last evening, Michelle Obama had this to say about the idea of falling forward in relation to former President Trump. Take a listen.
She understands that most of us will never be afforded the grace of failing forward. We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. We don't get to change the rules, so we always win. If we see a mountain in front of us, we don't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top.
Joining us here live in Chicago, Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle from the state they tell us may decide this election, Pennsylvania. Congressman, it's great to see you.
Great to be with you.
Some real poetry in the room last night, failing forward, generational wealth. What will happen here in Chicago? whether it's the speechifying or the money raised, that will actually change minds, that will move independents in your state to vote for Democrats in November?
Well, first, I would say Pennsylvania is the biggest and the most important of the battleground states. It's hard to come up with a plausible math for either side to get to 270 that wouldn't include Pennsylvania's 19. Now, on my side, which I'm working very hard to ensure wins my state and is elected this November, really tonight and tomorrow night are two of the best opportunities to introduce first tonight Tim Walz and ultimately tomorrow night at the conclusion of the convention Kamala Harris to the American people. In this, I don't have to tell you guys, in this incredibly diverse media environment, unlike 3-4 decades ago, there are few opportunities that get very large TV audiences. This is one of them, the debates being the only other. There will be tens of millions of people watching tonight and tomorrow night, many of whom are just simply not as familiar with either Kamala Harris or Tim Walz because they have not yet had that opportunity. So I'm very much looking forward to it. So far in the campaign, things have been going incredibly well. If you had told me 30 days ago that things would be going as well as they are, I'm not sure I would have believed it. Really, this has been so far the best case scenario.
Well, and of course, it's not just them that are campaigning. There are down-ballot races to win for the Democrats as well.
My own included.
Including yours. There are seats in the House that they are trying to gain. There are seats in the Senate they are trying to hold. We spoke with one of your Democratic colleagues, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, earlier today about how Harris at the top of the ticket changes the calculus in the House itself. And she essentially said that if you just look at the fundraising, it suggests that Democrats have the ability to pick up more seats potentially, that there is momentum. How do you feel? How can you characterize the feeling of the rest of your colleagues about what Harris is going to do for you guys specifically? Yeah,
well, first, just to remind everybody, the margin in the House of Representatives is literally only 4 seats. We need just a flip of 4 Republican-held seats. There are more than a dozen, in fact, I believe 18 currently Republican-held seats that are in districts that Joe Biden won in 2020. Some of those districts Joe Biden won by double digits. My own vested interest is that if we do win the majority in November, I will be chair of the Budget Committee in a year that will be incredibly important in 2025 in terms of setting the tax policy for the next decade. And I have to say, I feel incredibly, while I don't want to jinx anything, I feel incredibly good about where things stand in terms of our ability to win the majority this November. I think if the election were held today, actually we would take it, but we still have about 75 days to go.
Considering your committee assignment, what we just heard from Michelle Obama, she talked about the affirmative action of generational wealth. Pretty powerful words that you can interpret maybe in a couple of different ways. There's a conversation, a debate now in Washington that you're going to play a big role in on whether to extend or make permanent the Trump-era tax cuts from 2017. Don't tax cuts promote generational wealth?
Yeah, well, first, I have to say I love that line. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I am originally from one of those typical blue-collar neighborhoods in Philadelphia. So I don't exactly enjoy being lectured to by people like Donald Trump who pulled themselves up by their daddy's bootstraps. So I very much appreciated Michelle Obama's line last night. I think one of the real fault lines in the campaign this November will be a Democratic ticket that actually comes from middle-class America versus, the Prince of Mar-a-Lago. In terms of setting tax policy for next year, I will be focused on those policies that grow the middle class. I genuinely do not believe giving mega tax cuts to the top 0.1%, which is what Trump's TCJA did in 2017. I don't believe that's the best way to create jobs in this country, and I have reams of data from the CBO that prove that.
Well, and certainly a critique of that plan we get a lot here on Bloomberg from economists and otherwise is that it could expand the deficit significantly, potentially be inflationary as well. Everyone's quite worried about that. But we've heard similar criticisms about some of the policies Harris has put forward, that she too could add to the deficit. Even if she's cutting taxes for different people, you still could end up in some ways with the same end result. How do you respond to that criticism?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought up the word deficit because this is actually an area where I want to talk some truth to both sides. The reality is we probably have not talked enough about the deficit over the last 10 years. Well, I think if we go back 15 years ago in 2011 and 2012, clearly we know one of the things that slowed that economic recovery was a shift to deficit reduction too soon. At the same time, though, I don't want to make the mistake on the other extreme. As we look to the 2030s and beyond, some of these deficit and debt projections become very concerning. Sooner rather than later, it will actually take both sides in Washington to have a serious, grown-up conversation about tackling our deficit and debt. I have to say, I have not seen much of that in my decade in Washington so far.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of folks find religion on debts and deficits when it's not an election year, I suppose. Maybe that'll change the conversation next year. But, you know, we just got through this very quick selection of a running mate here, and that's what brings us here tonight on day 3. Tim Walz is going to be speaking to some very excited delegates, a lot of whom, though, wanted your governor, Josh Shapiro, to be the running mate. Some said it would be a lock to win Pennsylvania. It's the smart move politically. Are you disappointed your governor isn't on the stage tonight?
Well, first, just to be clear, and I say this as a believing Christian, I'm not sure the Lord Jesus would have made Pennsylvania a lock on either ticket. Father, forgive me for saying that as a good Catholic boy. Look, the nature of Pennsylvania is such that I'll just say at least no human being would have made it a lock. I've served with Josh in the State House, and I served for 4 years with Tim Walz in the U.S. House. I am incredibly excited about Tim's speech tonight. You've seen him already on the campaign trail present himself in an enormously authentic and genuine way that is connected with the American people. Poll after poll, I've now counted up 11 polls that have looked at Tim Walz. In every single one of them, his favorable rating is higher than his unfavorable rating, most of those polls by double digits, which is very rare in the political climate in which we're living today. So far, so good in terms of people having a positive view of Coach Walz, and I think that will continue over the next 76, 77 days.
We've been warned that we're likely not going to get much policy in his speech or in Harris's speech tomorrow night, for that matter, that this isn't necessarily what this is about, getting into the specifics of policy and different issues. But she has come under some criticism for flip-flopping on policy issues like fracking. Donald Trump has suggested her previous comments on fracking means she can't win Pennsylvania. She's singing a different tune now, but do you worry that could harm her chances in your state?
So first, I will say, and I say this as someone who's a member of Congress from Philadelphia, where the fracking isn't taking place. That's largely in western Pennsylvania, 300 miles away. That said, when I was a state legislator, I was always a supporter of encouraging the development of our natural gas, which obviously involves fracking. One man's flip-flop is another man's evolution, and I welcome her evolving on this issue. You know, it's just natural that as you age and as you grow and as you gain a different perspective, in her case, going from a senator representing California, which had no sort of exposure to fracking whatsoever, to then being a vice president for the last 3.5 years for the nation, I would expect and certainly hope for an evolution on certain issues. I think it's appropriate. And in the end of the day, I think she arrived at the right place, both in terms of policy and politics.
All right, Congressman, great to see you here in Chicago.
Good to see you as well.
Thank you so much for your time. That is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of the swing state of Pennsylvania. And coming up, we'll be joined by Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts. He'll be here live with us as we broadcast from the Democratic National Convention. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama jabbing former President Donald Trump for his use of the phrase black jobs during a debate with President Biden back in June, something he then doubled down on later. Welcome back to our live broadcast from Chicago and the Democratic National Convention as we get prepared for night 3, when we will hear from the headliner, the vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, later this evening. And as we look ahead, we're joined now by former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, who is here with us in studio. Governor, great to see you. Thank you so much
for having me.
Coming in. It's hard to acknowledge the week that is being had here in Chicago without
Has it been just a week?
Well, I guess it's been 2 days, but you know, these are stacked days,
I was
sir.
going to say, it feels like dog years.
Yeah, the last 4 weeks, I think, has probably felt like a year to many, but it is historic in nature. we are about to see not just a woman, but a woman of color for the first time accept the Democratic nomination for president.
Yes.
And there is obviously very charged language on the other side of this campaign. How should we be thinking about the politics of race in this election cycle, especially given the candidacy of Kamala Harris?
Well, I think, first of all, there's probably more race in our politics than I'd like, and I think probably most people would like. But I love firsts as one, and I think I feel incredibly blessed at a time like this to live in a country where you can be a Kamala Harris and come from what she's come from and become the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States. And I think she will win, and I think she'll do a great job. I feel the same kind of elation about Tim Walz, who grew up on a farm, I think in Nebraska, and has lifted himself and been in service, like Kamala Harris, of lifting others, and has the opportunity now to be the Democratic nominee for vice president. That is an American story, and it is, in the instance of Kamala Harris, associated with race, but it is a story that once was told more often in this country than any other country on earth. And I'm a Democrat for some of the reasons that, frankly, they've been talking about, that we've got to create, in the collaboration between government and the private sector, circumstances that permit people not just to imagine a different place for themselves, but actually practically to reach for it.
People should know you were only the second black man elected governor in the United States of America. I had the pleasure of covering you for some time as the governor of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Joe.
I also remember what happened when Danielle Allen tried to run for governor. She dropped out of the race because she said there was no path. What about the challenges specifically facing women of color, black women, trying to reach higher office?
Well, first of all, of Danielle, who is immensely talented. I hope she'll come back into politics. I don't know that the only factor in her decision to drop out was being a woman of color. I think probably I stayed in because I didn't know any better. It was my first time running for anything. You remember, Joe.
Sure.
And our dynamic at home in Massachusetts, I would say, is less Democrat-Republican than it is insider outsider. By the way, I think that's the dynamic increasingly all over the country.
How about that?
And so I think, now having said that, I think there are special challenges and maybe opportunities for the Harris-Walz candidacy because it's such a short period of time. And they will have to do some things that aren't always done in our kind of unlimited, political campaigning, and a lot more direct to voters, a lot more direct, a lot more volunteer organizing that's outside the campaign, which I think has been one of the most inspiring parts of this experience. She's finding her voice. We did the first event 6 days, I think, after the torch was passed in Western Massachusetts, and she showed up. It was absolutely electric. I see her now at podium, and she seems a lot more relaxed. She's paying less attention to the teleprompter and so on. So there are those challenges, and converting all this energy and excitement to actual organization and turnout. That's not a small thing. But as I say, I think a lot of other folks are taking that on themselves outside the campaign, and I think they will have to rely on some of us just doing it on our own.
You, of course, have had a storied career in politics, but you now also work in business and you come on Bloomberg for that reason and others. How do you consider what a Kamala Harris presidency would look like and what kind of investment opportunities or the way in which it may change the business climate, knowing specifically there's been a focus on democratic values for you, Vistara, specifically. How do you see her reflected in the business world?
Well, so to the notion of democratic values, and I use that term in a nonpartisan way. The notion that communities, that people, that place all matter, they all count. One of the things we do at the Vistria Group, and that I did at the fund that I founded at Bain Capital, so-called Impact Investing Fund, was invest in ways that demonstrated you didn't have to exchange superior financial return for stakeholder engagement and positive stakeholder impact. And I think that is important to long-term value. It's also important to the long-term success of businesses. What I want to see going forward is a lot more conspicuous collaboration with the business and the not-for-profit community. I'm not just talking about how to regulate or the importance of regulating, as we used to say in Massachusetts, at the speed of business. So it's not a barrier, it's an enabler. But I mean just really trying to identify what the opportunities are, how, for example, you leverage these enormous new tools in the infrastructure bill, in the CHIPS and Science Act, and in the rescue plan, alongside private sector assets and investment to create lasting economic growth. Because that is a part of that story of opportunity in this country too, right? We have to have an economy that grows, as the president says, and I have said, it has to grow out to the middle and the marginalized, and not just up to the well-connected.
Well, it's nice to see you here in Chicago. People might not realize your hometown, isn't it?
It is.
Here we are.
It is.
Nice to see you in Chicago.
It's good to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Here at the table, Deval Patrick, the former governor of Massachusetts, at the DNC here in Chicago. Coming up, highlights of our conversation with the mayor of New York. Eric Adams spent some time with us at the table today as well. It's up next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Cast its votes for Kamala Harris. Giddy up! Indiana delivers its 86 delegates.
Minnesota, we cast 10 votes present, and we deliver 81 votes for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
California, we proudly cast our 482 votes for the next president, Kamala Harris. Yeah!
It was a big show, a little taster of the in-person roll call last night at the United Center. Joining us live in Chicago here. Thanks for being with us. Night 3 of the Democratic National Convention. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons here in Chicago with more on what to expect tonight. Bloomberg's Angela Greiling and Brad Stone. Great to see you both here at the table. Before we talk about tonight, Angela, that's a tough act to follow. What the heck are we in for this evening?
It really is. We've got Governor Tim Walz keynoting tonight. He'll be introduced by Senator Amy Klobuchar from his home state of Minnesota. Nancy Pelosi will be before him, President Bill Clinton. But Tim Walz is our keynoter tonight. He will be introducing himself to a nation that really doesn't know him very well yet. So this is really his big moment.
Well, and of course, the nation is only just starting to get to know him, and some may be familiar with him only by the way in which he's gone a little bit viral on social media for phrases like weird when describing Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. How much of his speech tonight is going to be trying to make those even just little small moments that are going to resonate and circulate and make his face better known?
I mean, I think he has to introduce himself, right? Did people know who he was a month ago? So I think we're going to get a lot of his folksy charm, his blue state appeal, his red state appeal for that matter, and hopefully maybe color in some of the ambiguities and what he stands for, what he cares about, and what his portfolio would be if the ticket wins.
You know, Bill Clinton's going to be speaking tonight as well, to your point. Our Democratic analyst, Jeannie Shanzano, said earlier that he is the voice when it comes to the economy, making the pitch to Democrats, delegates here, but also people at home. What are we going to hear from Bill Clinton tonight about it's the economy stupid?
You know, I don't know, but I will say, you know, this is my first DNC, but I'm old enough to remember 2016 when Bernie Sanders and his followers left the convention.
That's right.
2004, where the crowd is dotted with Howard Dean signs and Dennis Kucinich signs. This convention has been a triumph of tactics over ideology. It is unified, and the unifier, ironically, is Donald Trump. So I expect Bill Clinton to kind of, you know, emphasize that, aim the party and the voters against the opposition.
Well, as we talk about this idea of democratic unity, we are seeing some areas in which there is still division on display, perhaps in a smaller form than we all thought we might coming into Chicago, where there was warning of tens of thousands of protesters, perhaps. But we have seen protests, and we've seen the arrest of just yesterday some 50 people by police forces here. I wonder how you view the hype around the kind of discord we might see around this convention and the way in which it has only materialized on the margins, Angela.
Right. There really has not been the disruption that the specter of 1968 in Chicago, of course, brought as we went into this week. It's also something, I don't know if we'll hear Governor Walz address it tonight, but it's absolutely something that follows him because he, of course, was governor of Minnesota when George Floyd was murdered, when the national unrest began literally down the street from where he lives and works. So it is something that he may mention. It's something he can probably use as a strength, the way he handled that. He allowed peaceful protests at first and then eventually brought order back to his state. But it's clearly something that he knows is also a liability that Republicans are hammering him on as well.
The Trump campaign has been counter-programming this convention with a different event or series of events each day. North Carolina, Asheboro at the rally today, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance. And we heard from Donald Trump's running mate, Senator Vance, who's still taking shots at Governor Walz and his military record. This is what he said today.
Now, you know what I think would appeal to rural voters and veterans, Kamala? Not having a running mate who lies about his service record. Why don't we try that?
The accusations of stolen valor are landing pretty heavily in this campaign. Will the governor talk about his service record tonight?
Oh, he absolutely will. I mean, he served 24 years. I don't think it's anything that he has to be ashamed of. I expect him to talk about it a lot and maybe provide something of a retort to the line that we saw in 2004 was incredibly damaging.
That's right.
To John Kerry. So yeah, I think we will hear from him.
Well, and it may be something that he can't avoid talking about if we're going to continually see the Republican ticket bringing it up time and again as one of their primary criticisms. The other, Angela, is that he is dangerously liberal or radically progressive, adjectives attached to more left-leaning notions. And certainly he has been more progressive as the governor of Minnesota, maybe less so during his time in the House. How do you expect he straddles the line if he's going to try to paint himself as a moderate or as a moderate progressive or
He really wants to paint himself at both. This ticket needs every vote it can get if they're going to win in November. And tonight in the auditorium, he'll be speaking to his base. This is, for the most part, the liberal part of the Democratic Party. That's who shows up and is delegates to the convention, but it's a national speech. The DNC has been bragging about their television viewership so far this week. Obviously, each night the speakers get bigger, so they're going to expect more viewers tonight than the first two nights. So this is his chance to talk to those voters all over the country, including the more moderate ones, the people that might be deciding which ticket to vote for when they cast their ballot. So he really does need to talk about his record as a House member when he was more moderate, in addition to his more liberal gubernatorial record.
Assuming they get him on in time for prime time.
Well, that's the other
little bit of a problem this week. Can we get the man on before 11 p.m. Washington time? I guess we'll find out tonight, because it's not just the delegates in the room, is it? He's got to get people in their living rooms.
But this is my point about tactics over ideology. And I think it has been a remarkable lack of specificity of policy details over the last 2 days, and it is by design. I mean, this is a big tent party that likes nothing more than a circular firing squad, right? But it just hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because the party is united in trying to defy Donald Trump a second term. And so I don't think they want to do anything in terms of policy specifics that risks the coalition that, through circumstance, Harris and Walz have been able to build.
Obviously, the convention is an opportunity for free media. All the networks are here. We are covering it. We are airing the speeches this evening. But we know that after this wraps up, there is going to be a ton of money poured into ad buys, some $200 million just in the weeks between now and Labor Day. The Harris campaign has made another $370 million of purchases through November. How should we think about the war that is about to take place over the airwaves?
I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid it. But behind that war is a fundraising war. And that's another reason why, this ticket does not want to do anything to alienate business, and particularly tech and even crypto. The Biden administration enormously hostile to crypto interests. I went to a party last night thrown by a crypto billionaire. Great party. The Killers performed.
Wow.
But there's clearly hope of a reset. And I think the administration, the Democratic ticket is probably telling a lot of different interests what they want to hear right now to get folks into the tent.
Okay, obviously we need to be hanging out with Brad at night in Chicago. While Brad's partying with crypto, is there going to be a presence or a mention of regulation of high tech in this convention, or is that for somewhere later?
I'm going to bet on no on that, because as Brad was saying, there's really nothing to gain for the speakers here this week to talk specifics of policy. They certainly do not want to alienate business in general, but specifically donors. And while the tech industry has certainly moved more to the right in recent years in terms of their political giving, there's still lots of Democratic money from the tech industry, and money since the Democratic ticket changed has been pouring in, and they absolutely want to keep that spigot open. So, no, I don't think we're going to hear hardcore policy priorities of any sort, and certainly not cracking down on an industry they need to be friends with.
And by the way, just to add what Angela said, you know, we got one indication from a big donor, Reid Hoffman, a venture capitalist, that Harris should consider replacing Lena Khan at the FTC. And the progressive wing of the party, you know, rebelled. She's a folk hero. And so it's the kind of example of how fragile this coalition is and why they probably don't want to address some of these issues.
Well, and I find that so striking because J.D. Vance loves Lena Khan, or at least he's had high praise for her. And it's one of the ways, Joe, in which we are seeing an interesting overlap between these two
More
tickets.
than once. That's correct.
Yeah.
Maybe Lena Khan will be hired no matter who wins the election, though I tend to doubt Donald Trump agrees with him on that.
Well, I guess that's very true. We have a whole other conversation once we leave here in Chicago about the way in which a cabinet, for example, or the regulatory agencies may take shape under these different presidencies, potential presidencies, that is. Finally, Angela, we are having a slate of speakers tonight that any one of them you might be able to suggest would be someone who could introduce Kamala Harris. Her husband spoke last night. The Obama spoke last night. Clinton, Pelosi, Jeffries. Who am I forgetting? Buttigieg, Shapiro, Wes Moore. They're all tonight. Who's going to be left to speak tomorrow? Who's going to introduce her?
Well, the rumor is that Beyonce performs tomorrow night.
There we go.
I don't know about introducing, but that's what we're all waiting to see. Really, this convention speaker lineup is an audition of people who are looking for cabinet spots, who are looking to raise their own profiles. They're not running this year. Some of them obviously were considered to be vice president and weren't picked. But tomorrow night's lineup, boy, it'll be star power.
All right. Well, of course, we'll have it covered for you here on Bloomberg, as will our team. Bloomberg's Angela Greiling and Brad Stone, thank you so much for joining us. Now, earlier today, we sat down with New York Mayor Eric Adams, who told us that Democrats should shake off the soft-on-crime image, saying that New York should serve as a model for other major cities. He spoke with us earlier here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Well, you know, you have a real focus, and I think this campaign is doing something that's extremely smart. We feel strong in New York. We have very few other areas that we need to focus on. And the goal is not to get Eric Adams on the stage. The goal is to get VP Harris and the team elected. And they're putting together the right speakers, and we're just going to find out what is our role, and we're going to carry the ball based on that.
So you may not be a messenger on the stage at this convention, but that doesn't mean necessarily that there might not be a message you would advocate for, not just given your role as mayor of New York City at a time when Republicans are criticizing cities, including where we are now, Chicago, on issues like crime. But you're a mayor and a former cop. What is the winning message on crime for a former prosecutor as she campaigns for president of the United States?
And I think that's an amazing question, because this is what I've been talking about for so long. We have a great product in the Democratic Party. We're leading the voice around getting rid of assault rifles, about being proactive and not placing people on pathway of criminality. And we need to sell that. And unfortunately, we've allowed the belief that Democrats are soft on crime, and we're not. Crime is dropping in New York City and many of the cities where our mayors are located. I was speaking with the Atlanta mayor a few days ago. We're seeing a real focus on public safety. I say it all the time. It's the prerequisite to prosperity. And that's the leading message coming out. Affordability, public safety is crucial to this election.
We spoke earlier with the mayor of San Francisco, which has been held up as the poster child for crime in this country by Republicans criticizing progressive policies when it comes to crime and safety. Chicago, where we are now, he compares to Afghanistan. Donald Trump refers to New York City as a war zone. You're talking about crime statistics. Do you start putting up billboards? How do you get the facts delivered?
Oh, it's so important. And, you know, one thing is when someone used an analogy of saying things are out of control in New York City, our subway system with 4.1 million riders, we have an average of 5 felonies a day. We want to get rid of them, but let's put it in perspective. Our robberies are at the lowest record in recorded history. And when you look at all the major crime categories are decreasing, our economy has come back. New York City is a real model of how a Democrat can turn around the city and move it in the right direction.
Well, of course, we don't just pay attention for New York City and the way in which crime is being handled, but migration also, considering you have had an influx of migrants that the city have had to deal with. You've actually been somewhat critical of this administration in that regard. Kamala Harris is part of this administration. She was charged in the early days with taking care of the issue of the border. This is something Republicans are placing a lot of blame specifically on her for. Does she deserve some of that blame? Has she not played a role in what has happened in New York City?
Well, first of all, we received over 212,000 migrants and asylum seekers, and I'm proud that not one child or family is sleeping on the streets of the city of New York as we manage that. And I've been extremely clear about securing our borders. And I think that when we look at blame to be placed, it's the lack of real, true immigration reform. This is a country where immigrants have always participated in the American dream, and we need to ensure that we have a pathway in doing so. And I'm looking forward to sharing my ideas with the administration on some of the things we witnessed in New York, and as national immigrant leaders have looked at what we have done and a level of humanity that we've shown. The key here is employment. You put people to work, they can pursue the American dream. If you don't, we take away that dignity.
Mr. Mayor, federal prosecutors in New York served another round of grand jury subpoenas, this time directly to you in a corruption investigation that's been going on for the better part of a year now. You've made it clear that you're done talking about this, that you want the process to play out. Don't the people of New York deserve a little bit more of an explanation than that?
What the people of New York deserve is a very thorough review, and I feel confident when that review is done, they're going to see that I did nothing wrong. Former law enforcement officer, I know what it is to ensure that laws are enforced. You don't break them. And then it's important that the people of New York have been made as disciplined and focused. My job is to fight on behalf of New Yorkers, bringing back the economy like we have, making sure our streets are safe like we have, build affordable housing like we are doing. That is my focus, and not to be distracted. Let the reviewers do their job. I'm going to do the job that the people elected me for, and that's to recover our city.
Well, Mr. Mayor, when Donald Trump was getting hit with all of these different indictments, some of the way in which Democrats were prosecuting the campaign against him was that he's too mired down in legal battles and he is distracted. And that's a lot to deal with even personally, let alone trying to be a leader. How are you navigating that personally? Why should New Yorkers not have doubt about your ability to do all these things at once?
Well, I think that, as you indicated, this was going on for several months. And look where our city is. You have a mayor that managed 212,000 migrants and asylum seekers. The economy has been revitalized, more jobs in the city history. Our subway systems are safe, 17,000 illegal guns removed off our streets. Our children are outpacing the state in reading and math. When you do an analysis of what I've done from tourism to safety to productivity to housing, you have to say to yourself, darn, that guy don't get distracted. He knows how to run a city, just as I was a person that knew how to keep the city safe as a police officer.
That was the mayor of New York here in Chicago with us, Eric Adams, talking earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, we'll look ahead to what Governor Tim Walz plans to do tonight with our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano on the way next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Tim is the kind of person who should be in politics. Born in a small town, served his country, taught kids, coached football, took care of his neighbors. He knows who he is, and he knows what's important. You can tell those flannel shirts he wears, don't come from some political consultant. They come from his closet, and they have been through some stuff.
President Obama speaking last night at the DNC ahead of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's scheduled appearance later this evening. He, of course, is the headliner on this night 3 of the Democratic National Convention. He will formally accept the vice presidential nomination tonight. So as we look ahead to his big address and the others we will get this evening, we're joined by our signature political panel, Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Welcome to you both. It's been a busy few days here in Chicago. It's been a busy few days, certainly, for the ticket. Tim Walz was in Wisconsin yesterday for a period of time with Kamala Harris. Today, I imagine, Rick, has gone very differently for him. You've, of course, been here before, where the candidate is getting ready to make their case, introduce themselves to the American people. Just walk us through what Tim Walz is likely to go through this evening before he walks out to that podium on stage.
Well, we saw earlier today he did his walkthrough, which is the perfunctory thing, but you go out and you're surrounded by the convention staff and they point to your teleprompters and there's the center one and this is what you're going to see when you're out there. Give him all kinds of hints as to how to make his presentation and physically just get used to being on that stage because it's a daunting thing to walk out there or, as Chuck Schumer did, dance out there. I don't think we're going to expect that out of the But then now what he's doing is, you know, probably because he hasn't got a lot of experience on a teleprompter, maybe even none in a public forum, he's probably in a room right now with a teleprompter going through it. Because the other thing that has to happen is the teleprompter guy who's running it has to get his tempo, right? There's actually a dial that makes it go.
We know a little bit about that.
Yeah, you guys know something about that.
The control room is nodding along with you.
Exactly. So these are like, it's a partnership out there. And if that thing goes too fast for him, it's not going to be good.
Boy, all right. So does it behoove speakers tonight to go short? How about a 20-minute speech and a mic drop moment after Donald Trump kept us up for almost 2 hours that night?
Yeah, it would be nice, but again, we're talking Bill Clinton,
So
Nancy
just not gonna
Pelosi.
happen.
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a whole young contingent from Pete Buttigieg. So, you know, they have a lot of people out there. But I do think I love the flannel shirts. I'm wondering if he wears the camo hat because that's been a big thing. And he's being introduced, I understand, by Prince and Sheila E. by John Legend and Sheila E. who are going to play Prince.
Not bad.
And yeah, it would have been very odd if it was Prince. But
AI does interesting things.
But so he may waltz out, he may dance out like Chuck Schumer, but it's going to be another big night at the DNC. Hopefully, just not
They're really
starting at
leveraging
midnight.
celebrity
Yes.
and entertainment in a serious way at this convention.
Certainly, except for James Taylor, who, of course, was nixed during the scheduling issues of the first night. Presentation, though, is one thing. And obviously, there is a lot of presentation factors at play here, Jeannie, but message is another. What does Tim Walz need to get on that stage and say to not just the people gathered in the convention hall, but the people watching at home tonight?
He needs to introduce himself. Unknown beyond his home state 3 weeks ago, he's been thrust to the center of American politics, and he needs to introduce himself. He needs to also talk about Kamala Harris and what kind of relationship they have, friendship they have, and what kind of team they will be. He also needs to address those folks on the other side. He's been being hit in the last 24 hours by his opponent, J.D. Vance, on fibbing about IVF. So there is a lot there that I think he needs to do. But most importantly, I think the job for him tonight is to talk about how he is the Midwestern dad, coach, hunter, military vet, and the people that the Democrats need to win are people that he knows, grew up with, and he has their back. I suspect we're going to hear from some of his students as well as football players who talked about his impact on his impact on their lives.
Who does Bill Clinton resonate with in this Democratic Party?
Those same group that Tim Walz needs to resonate with.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton is very good about explaining the economics of, you know, appealing to the middle of the country. It's very important. And also speaking to a huge group that may not feel as particularly invited to the DNC party this week, which is men, particularly young men in the center of the country. So he's going to do some of that. Who knows how long he will go, but he will do some of that tonight.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are making time predictions here, Rick. Obviously, he was a candidate that was welcomed by union membership. Young people seem to have really attached themselves to him. But what is the vice president's role in reaching out to, as Jeannie points out, others that they're still trying to bring into the fold, not the people in the convention hall who are obviously going to be big fans and cheering loudly for him?
Yeah, he's going to be welcomed by a very adoring crowd tonight. But you're right. The real projection is out there in these targeted states to certain demographics. And I do think we haven't talked enough about the fact that he's got a message he needs to send on substance, right? It's not just his bio. What kind of leader is he going to be? What is his position on the economy? How does he feel about the inflation that's been, breaking the backs of a lot of, American voters? Where is he going on some of these critical issues like immigration? Is he going to talk about abortion, which has been a mainstay of this convention so far as one of the issues that the Democrats have focused on? I mean, I think he cannot escape the opportunity to define who he is, because the pollsters want to then go in there and say, do people feel like he's one of them? Does he feel like he can be supported because he respects his values, his views on these issues? It's not a night that's just about personality. This has been a policy-free convention so far. And if they don't start tonight, tomorrow night will be too late.
Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, we thank you, of course. We'll have a lot more straight ahead on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons, live in Chicago as we prepare for the festivities tonight. Night 3 here, of course, of the Democratic National Convention. We've spent the day bringing you voices from around the political sphere, largely Democrats, of course. That's why we are here, but also keeping tabs on the other campaign with counter-programming from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Tonight, though, Kaylee, this is the first of the two big nights, the headliners, starting with Governor Tim Walz.
Yeah, his big moment to introduce himself to the country. This will be the probably biggest chance he has to do so, because he's not just speaking to tens of thousands that are gathered in the United Center just blocks away from where we are, but of course everyone watching at home, assuming they can get this thing in prime time. And of course, you're about to head over there, Joe, because you will be on the floor for this tonight and feeling the energy that has been quite robust into Chicago.
Those of you on Bloomberg TV getting a view of the room there, and we will bring you inside the United Center a bit later on for the speeches this evening. He'll be following, of course, Bill Clinton, the former president. Tim Walz will have live for you on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Indeed, so stick with us for full coverage. And we have to say before we go here from Chicago on Bloomberg TV and radio, a very big happy birthday to Joe Matthew.
It's a big number, all right.
It's Bloomberg.